through some of the issues is the Advisors Conservative MP, Danny Kruger. Good morning.
Good morning, Ben.
Isn't the truth here, Danny, that the genie's out of the bottle? We've got more and more used to freedoms returning, and the public isn't going to want to get back the other way.
Well, let's see. I mean, I should say how much I regret this. It's a huge shame. As you say, we're just beginning to emerge from this hibernation that we've been in for so many months. And, I really have always felt for young people particularly being cooped up. And, of course, they want to get out and socialise. And it's an enormous pity for everybody that this has had to be done. But what I think we should take from it is really a simplification of the rules. And I think the problem we all had was how complicated everything had become, because the government was trying to flex the rules to allow for all sorts of different circumstances. And although that was the good impulse, the result was that we were all pretty unclear about what was allowed, and therefore people were deliberately or not deliberately mixing when they shouldn't. And the infection is spreading now. So we've got to do this. The good thing to say, Ben, if I may, is that everything that we need to do for kind of organised life, including going out, attending sports events, going to church and so on, and of course work, is all completely permitted in these larger gatherings. It's just socialising that we're going to have to do less of.
And you mentioned simplification, but people I sense are scratching their heads. First of all, why the number 6? What does that actually achieve in reducing the spread, which, 7 or 8 or even 5 doesn't?
Well, you'd ask the same question about that number, Ben. They obviously are having to make an arbitrary cut-off. Presumably the science informs them that the spread is lower, but at that level. But we have to have decent size. I mean, most people's households are 6 and under, and we don't want to stop people going out in their households. So I think I'm afraid it's got to be a figure chosen, and that one.
Okay. It is going to stop people from doing what they enjoy, though, in some cases. After 8 on this show, we're going to hear from a musician called Rebecca, and she tells us she can't understand why she can't rehearse with her 6 bandmates in a socially distant space indoors, but 2 groups of 15 men or women can get up close and very personal with a group of 15 other strangers every Saturday for a game of rugby.
I know completely. I mean, there are always going to be these very difficult distinctions. I mean, what's the difference between a sports practice that's organised and a band practice? But they'll be making these judgments because, one is considered to have more possibility of putting the rules around it so that people at a rugby practice would be able to observe these rules. I really sympathise with everybody.
It's not scientific,
you might be able to argue that it's work.
It's not. I mean, you mentioned the scientists. That is not scientific. That is arbitrary as well.
Well, okay. So there is always a line to be drawn, a judgment to be made about what can be determined from the science and what has to just be communicated simply to human beings in forms that they will understand. And I think it's a good move that the government has now made to say everybody can understand this rule now. You're not allowed to mix socially in groups of more than 6. And yes, that will throw up all sorts of really difficult situations and choices. And I have every sympathy. I was looking forward to a birthday party next weekend as my oldest friend now has to be cancelled. These things are affecting us all, and I have great sympathy for everyone who's not going to be able to do what they wanted.
Yeah, it is going to affect us all, and there are increasingly more and more people, I think, well, maybe you don't agree, I certainly see it, I hear it, who are questioning if we're going over the top here. I mean, if I can just give you one statistic, the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control, in the last 24 hours, say that 0.11 deaths per million people in the UK have occurred because of COVID. We've got a government saying they're sending in the COVID marshals, and we're going to increase fines. And some people can't square those 2 points of the compass.
Well, it's true that the death rate is really down and infection rates are down. And locally, we've got we really hardly got a problem at all. We've had 7 new cases per week in Wiltshire. And of course, most people who get it don't suffer very much. So this is not a massive problem for us at the moment. What we've desperately trying to do, though, is to prevent it growing to the levels we had a few months ago when it nearly overwhelmed our health service and we ran the risk of hundreds of thousands of people dying. I sympathise with you, and I agree that is what you just described, a growing sense that this is all too much. I get that in my correspondence from constituents, and I have great sympathy. I wish we were not living in this bizarre lockdown state where we've got all sorts of civil and police officials bossing us around and threatening fines, and we're all having to wear these absurd masks and not meet up casually with people. I regret it enormously. But the decision that's being made, and I support it, is we've got to go through this awful, weird period for what I hope will only be a few months so that we can beat this virus and get back to normal. Otherwise, we're going to be living with this for years.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say. By the sounds of it, you're not completely a fan of lots of the measures, but you're happy for the government to persist with them.
I do support them. I just think I think they're regrettable. I mean, as the Prime Minister said yesterday, we're very, very sorry that this is happening.
What about those that say, and from what you've said, it plays into their hands, that this is all about a game of control now, whilst there's a lot of other stuff going on in the corridors of power, Brexit being one of those examples, that this is all puppets on a string, and given the figures, given the plummeting death rate, talk of COVID marshals and us all arguing over music rehearsals and rugby matches and 6, 7 or 8 meeting up, it's not the big issue, but the government wants us to talk about this.
Oh, right, okay. No, Ben, I think you're being a conspiracy theorist there. I mean, if you're suggesting that either that the government wants to control the population to this extreme degree, well, I don't think you've read Boris Johnson's personality right. He doesn't really believe in, rules and regulations and government bureaucracy. That's not his style, and it's certainly not what the Conservative government is about. We want people to be free, and we hate all this bureaucracy that is necessary. And then you're suggesting that perhaps there's some sort of diversionary tactic going on. We're trying to distract people. I think
it's a fair accusation. Just again, sensing the mood. This isn't from me. It's just sensing the mood of the country.
Yeah. Well, I'm afraid some people really, really hate Brexit, and they might think that government's trying to divert attention. I mean, that isn't the case. I mean, we have two enormous political challenges on our plate at the moment. Difficult to see which is more significant, but they're both having to be handled at the same time. And sorry if they sometimes clash on the news headlines and one gets pushed down the news agenda a bit.
But you'd agree that if we weren't talking about all this now, we might well be asking you questions about specific law breaking in Parliament.
Well, you're very welcome to ask me those questions.
What do you make of it?
Well, what we've got is a very challenging situation where we're not, at the moment, confident we're going to get the deal that we've all wanted with the EU. It's still absolutely possible, and both sides, I believe, want it. If we don't get a free trade agreement, we have to decide how to manage the future without one, and that involves protecting fundamentally the Northern Irish peace process and ensuring that the Good Friday Agreement is honoured. That means making some minor technical tweaks, which is all it is, to the withdrawal agreement that was agreed last year. We really don't want to be in that position, but if we are, it's more important that we honour the Northern Ireland peace process and put UK law as sovereign over international law. But obviously, we don't want to get to that position.
I mean, you say a minor technical tweak. People might, I don't know, have a problem with that because it is breaking international law if it happens. It's not minor and it's not a tweak. Well,
it is minor and it is a tweak. But it does involve changing the agreement that we made, and that is obviously regrettable. But if you have to ask yourself, if you don't want to do that, then what would you do? Would you break the Northern Ireland, the Good Friday Agreement, or do you accept the EU telling us how to run our economy, which is what they're asking? I mean, we could accept the deal that they're proposing, which is basically to accept this level playing field, make us still subject to EU rules, or we can break the Northern Ireland Good Friday Agreement, or we can make this technical change to the withdrawal agreement. Which of those three do you want?
Okay, it's good to hear it. Appreciate it. Let's get back to the testing. The Prime Minister made much, didn't he, of what he called a moonshot testing idea, that by early next year, millions could get tested and get their results in minutes. But here's what the Chief Scientific Advisor, Patrick Vallance, then said after that.
Some of them, we don't yet know that they work. So things like lateral flow tests are not yet being used widely. They're not being validated. There are prototypes which look as though they have some effect, but they've got to be tested properly. And so there are, as always with technologies, unknowns, and we would be completely wrong to assume that this is a slam dunk that can definitely happen. I think this needs to be tested carefully.
Now, the British Medical Journal's reporting these tests could cost £100 billion to deliver. Is that worth it?
Goodness, Ben, I don't know. I mean, we've got to get a vaccine. Ultimately, that's the real mission here, so that we can be free of all of this. But the testing system is the essential line of defence, because then we can all go about our lives while we're still living under the shadow of the virus. They are busy working, these scientists, on all these different systems. I can't really add to the scientific debate about what's going to work and when. I just want us to have a testing regime that works. And there's lots of news about difficulties getting tests, and I sympathise with those. I haven't actually had a massive correspondence on it, but I read it in the news. So I'm not sure that people in Wiltshire are suffering in terms of having to travel miles to get a test and so on. But it's something I'm paying very close attention to. I think we should have testing centres in all our market towns. It should be really easy, really quick. And that's, I know, where the government's trying to get to.
Now, I appreciate you saying you don't want to enter into a field there that you're not an expert at. That sounds sound to me. Why speculate? But in that case, why is it that Boris Johnson seems to make these grand statements when he's no scientific expert, and then we hear the scientists kind of pull back on that straight after? Where's the disjoin between the two? Do they speak to each other before they go into the room?
No, I think there's a very natural and healthy tension. Our leaders have to set the direction and set a goal, and that's what the idea of a moonshot. In 1960, John F. Kennedy saying we're going to get to the moon by the end of the decade. He didn't understand the science. He wasn't even sure that was possible. But him saying that's what we're going to do galvanised the system, and it was achieved. And we did the same with the original round of tests. Do you remember at the beginning of the crisis? And Matt Hancock said we're going to get hundreds of thousands of tests within a space of a month or two, and that was achieved. Very, very difficult, but it was done because he set that target. And I think that's what the Prime Minister's doing now. Of course, the scientists are then, it's quite appropriate, they suck their pencils and say, oh dear, this is going to be difficult and not totally sure, and what about this? And that's their job too.
Danny Kruger, thanks for coming on.
Great, thank you, Ben.